So let me start again. Welcome, everybody, to day three. And those of you who are attending for the first time, we are wrapping up a 3 day series of serving the wounded and helping those people involved in leadership and ministry have good information to help them as they are serving people who have experienced trauma and wounds in their lives. And today we're focusing on adults. And I want to share an example of someone who experienced trauma as a child, but didn't get to deal with that trauma until he was an adult. And here's the reason why. He was in his, I believe, late 30s when some really odd behavior and symptoms started showing and had no idea where they were coming from and what they were about. And through some help and some professional help, as well as support around him through his church, he is a pastor, realized that he had his brain. We've talked about the brain the last 2 days. His brain had literally suppressed the memories of what he had experienced as a kid. So for him to be able to jump into any kind of healing as a kid, it wasn't really possible for him. These things had to surface on their own. And when they did, he was able to get the help that he needed. And he's a gentleman that is in ministry, so he knows exactly what it's like to deal with this personally, but also be in your seat where you're trying to help others who have experienced these wounds and these traumas and help them to healing. So as we pick up today, we're acknowledging that adults come into our lives and into our ministries, and we're just meeting them wherever they are. And they may not even know where they are. And that's the opportunity we have. And that's why this content has been so helpful. I hope it's been helpful to you. And as we talk today, what's going to be helpful to you as you serve adults. As we're serving adults, let's just sort of clarify that. That could be men, that could be women, that could be couples, that could be adults that are in their 30s versus adults that are in their 70s who have experienced a small T that they're addressing, or who are in their 50s and for the first time they're addressing a big T. Our opportunity again is to say we're going to meet people where they are and be as empathetic and present as we can. So to help us today, you have two new faces on the screen. They've been behind the scenes the last 2 days, and now they get to be up front. And these two are some of our counselors and our team at Samaritan. So first is Lori Coates. She was our co-host in the background yesterday, chatting with you in the box. And so today she's going to help us in talking about this topic. Laura is one of our licensed mental health counselors. And while I have this in my mind, I want to make a statement here about the availability that Samaritan is to those of you in Sarasota and Manatee County. Lori works out of a couple of offices that we have. And if you're not aware of this, we have 10 offices, physical offices in Manatee and Sarasota County. So if you just look at our website, you can see where those are. And for you or people in your ministry, people in your network, we should be within 15 minutes of wherever they live or wherever they work to see someone, in a physical location. Of course, COVID has helped us and pushed us in the telehealth world, which is fantastic. So you might say we have an 11th office that we're available. And Lori's an example of someone that it's all over the place and can see clients in numerous ways. Our other panelist today, and I didn't mean she's all over the place in her head. I meant physically. That's just to clarify that. Bill Clough is our other panelist today, and Bill is on staff with us and oversees and coordinates our intern program, which I could say a lot about that, but we do have an intern program, and so our staff of over 20 includes, I believe at the moment, we have 6 interns, and he oversees that program. And again, for information's sake, it's called SIT, which is an acronym which stands for Spiritually Integrated Training. So our interns not only get the opportunity to work on their session hours, to work on their licensing, their full licensing within the state of Florida, they receive training so that as they're working with their clients, they are able to encompass exactly what we're talking about, and that is to help the client encompass all of who they are physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And that's why it's called spiritually integrated training. So thank you, Lori and Bill, for not tuning in, for sitting in and helping us with this conversation today. Before, I know Linda is our co host today. She's back in that role. She was that on Tuesday. She's going to help us in the chat. I see she's already doing that. And she's going to help us launch a poll. I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll just for fun because I tend to keep forgetting to do these. So I'm going to do it so I don't forget. And the first one is just to give a simple answer, a couple of answers here to the type of ministry that you personally are involved in. There's a couple of questions here. If you'll answer those, and I know some of you may not be, the work you do may not be, quote, ministry, but just what population do you serve, whether it's children, adolescents, men, women, or couples? And the second question, how long have you served in that role? And I see you're putting some answers in. That's good. And just figure out that year, put that in there. And then have you ever received training regarding trauma? So if you'll put your answers in there, and then we can end that polling and share the results there. Someone's been in service over 10 years. Thank you for that. That's awesome. And serving two of you. Awesome. Panelists, by the way, you can chime in here too, I believe, if you want. So everybody's working with adolescents and older, those who are in tune today. And I'm seeing this, you aren't seeing this, so I'm going to end the polling so you can see it. Share the results there. And that gives you just an idea of who's in the audience today. That's really awesome. Have you ever received training regarding trauma? 100%. So good. Y'all then can tell us how we did. You're going to be getting a survey after today's final webinar to give us some feedback on that. So I appreciate you doing that. I'm going to stop sharing those results, and I'm going to go ahead and launch a second poll while we're in the mood here. And we're going to get into talking about safety in just a couple of moments. And so this is just a one answer, well, you could have multiple choices here, but one question poll. Who are your safe people? And we've listed 8 different people. And what do we mean by that, by safe people? People that you know as you can trust the conversation. If you got something that is troubling your spirit, these are the people in your life that you know you could go to and not have to worry about, is it going to be held in good confidence? So you have 8 different choices there, and I see 7 of them are options that everybody is saying are parts of your network that you have provided for you. So just a couple more seconds to see what we have there. At the moment, best friend is the top one, or ministry leader. That's awesome. All right, I'm going to end that now so you can see the results of that. 50% say spouse or parent, 75 ministry leader, and 100% best friends. So I guess we should stop and thank God for our best friends. That's what it looks like in that result. So we're going to get into that a little bit more in just a moment. So let me end that. And I'm going to start sharing our screen now so you can see our PowerPoint. Hopefully yesterday in the email that I sent you, you were able to see our notes from the last 2 days, and I will resend that today so you can see these notes as well. I chose to eliminate these so you didn't have an excuse to not attend today. So we're talking about serving wounded adults, and along with what I was talking about before we did those polls is concerns and situations that adults choose to not start dealing with their wounds. And so I'm going to ask Lori first to help us talk about this particular slide and again, these are thoughts from that report, Trauma in America, which if you haven't already checked it out, I encourage you to look that up and download that if you can, and get all the stats that are available, because there's way more than what we've talked about. But so for adults not dealing with their wounds and trauma, we have a couple of bullet points here. As you look at that, Lori, how true is this? Give us some insight into further thoughts about why the adults tend to not do this and want to deal with their wounds.
Well, yes, many people do not want to deal with what happened to them, especially if it was a childhood trauma. And it's for various reasons that people don't want to deal with it. It's too painful. It's something that happened in my past. I need to get over it and just move on to the future. It doesn't do me any good to reflect back on my past and what happened. And this may be a little bit premature, but one of the things is that they don't realize is not dealing with that past hurt, whatever that might have been, is going to hinder them from doing the things in the future that they might need to do a lot of times. So, many people, they just push it again, push it, what it says on the screen, push it out of their mind. They don't want to deal with it. So they put it in the back of their mind. Unfortunately, our subconscious is the part of the brain that's going to catch everything that has ever happened to us in our lifetime. So at some point in time, that subconscious mind is going to push it back out into the conscious mind and make us deal with it. Like Michael, who couldn't be here, the repressed memories, that's where we get that from, is that they were repressed for a season, but at some point it was unrepressed and he had to deal with it. Quite often because, responses to childhood trauma, again, like I said, this happened in my childhood, I need to just get over it and move on. So most people don't get help until they're adults. Children sometimes are afraid to say something that happened, so they won't say anything, and so nobody knows. So then they have to, at that point, deal with it when they're adults.
Yeah, and Bill, before we move on to the next slide, I just want to ask you to give us your insights here. So if we recognize and we see something in, someone in our ministry, and they don't seem to see it, or they don't seem to see the need to address it, like Lori was just describing, what's our role there in that situation?
One of the things that you almost addressed or kind of alluded to it in the very beginning, a lot of people I know who've been traumatized or are dealing with depression, anxiety, a whole bunch of things. At first, my response is I find them annoying. So I tend not to be empathetic enough because their behavior is just not as smooth and as engaged as I would have hoped for. What Lori's pointing out is that it is necessary when you're in the midst of a crisis. You see this in the military, you see this with first responders. When the bomb goes off, when the bullets are flying, when the balloon goes up, when the hurricane hits, you need to repress your emotions. It does not help you at that point to go, oh, how do I feel about this? That would be disastrous. Afterward, to get healthy, to recover, you need to address your emotions. And people tend to get stuck in the survival mode of repression, and to help them feel safe, you're safe now. It's the crisis is not going on now.
Yeah.
And allow them that sense of listening.
When you just said that word survive, what reminded me of that slide yesterday where Amanda talked about the shift in the brain development of kids and their survival, shifted. So, wow, I hadn't really thought about that that can happen. And it's not the developmental part, but the brain can respond and maybe stay there as an adult, right?
Mm-hmm. And when children feel like they're in a life or death situation, they are. I mean, if you're 6, 8, 2, and people around you are dangerous, you are in fact in very serious danger, or at least you feel that way. And we may be able to see that you aren't, but they don't, and rightly so.
Yeah. So this next slide tells us some thoughts about why, some additional thoughts. So just let's say someone in your ministry as an adult does feel like, all right, it's time for me to start dealing with, they may not move forward, or they have tried and they've experienced some different things that have kept them from really getting in and getting the help they need. And here's two statistics from Trauma in America. 41% of Christians feel that no one understood how they felt in their times of trauma, or starting to deal with it now. 33% experience guilt or shame about that. So this heading at the top says to pay attention to isolation and frustration. Bill, what are your thoughts as you look at these two statistics?
Well, for one thing, people who are traumatized will often feel guilty, or they feel like a failure. I should have known, I should have done it, I should have done something different. And here's where a clergy therapist alliance is extremely helpful, because when people perceive clergy, it evokes their um, sense of the ideal that they've fallen short of. And I remember when I was first ordained, people would just spontaneously confess to me they hadn't been to church in a long time, or as often as they should have been. And I was like, why? I didn't bring that up.
Yeah.
But just the mere presence of clergy is sometimes it evokes their own sense of self blame. And it's not your fault. You are not necessarily doing anything. And therapists, people perceive differently. They don't, well, they'll sometimes be afraid you'll call them out, but for the most part, it doesn't evoke quite that sense of anxiety. So to have two is a good deal if you can get both.
Yeah, this is really good awareness for us, just to, again, remind ourselves we don't know where someone's coming from. And so as we move into talking about empathy again, but from the context of working with adults, this as part, it feels like step one, recognize where someone is. Lori, did you have a thought about this slide?
Yeah, one of the thoughts I had is that, well, they don't want to hear my problems.
Mhm.
You know, they don't want to hear about what happened to me. That the unimportance of what we've experienced sometimes can come into play there.
And that's their perception, and right, that's their perception. And one of the first slides we talked about on the first day was how the unbelief leads us to these different kinds of things, and which leads to behavior and yada yada. So this encourages us now to think about, we talked about empathy briefly yesterday, got a different slide here, but this encourages us to think about our ability to meet someone where they are based on what we see and what we can't see.
Right.
So this graphic is very helpful to remind us of what's above, what's the surface, and what's underneath the surface. Lori, as you look at this, what stands out to you as things we could be looking at to improve our empathy?
Well, the biggest thing, it's easy for us to be able to be empathetic for the things that we can see. It's the things we can't see, I think, that makes it much harder for us to be empathetic for. It's like, we don't know if a person that might be experiencing depression or anxiety has actually gone through a trauma in their life. So these are things that we can't see. So it's hard for us to be empathetic to that person or to that trauma if we don't know it's there. So just being able to talk about the things that we can't physically see.
Yeah, and underneath we got, what is it, 8 different things listed there of what you can't see. One word
Right.
that's jumping off the screen to me, Bill, is regrets. We haven't talked a whole lot about that, and the other things we've touched on, but you can't see people's regrets. How I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit because we didn't zoom in that on our prep, but how can we be empathetic and a good listener for those who are dealing with their regrets?
One thing that I am aware, certainly aware of in the church I attend, is the huge value of prayer for other people. When you care, here's what I'm concerned about. You learn from the other person some about the burdens they're carrying or the feelings they have, and all of have a life where we have an ideal that we think, here's what I want to be at my best, and we aren't that. And every now and then, or maybe even quite frequently, we do not live up to that ideal, and all of us have that experience. So all of us feel regret, and we feel some depth, and to be sympathetic to that, empathetic to that is extremely, to share your own, to say, yeah, I regret that when I first had children, I imagined, long talks and loving care and all this stuff. And but I did not always live up to that ideal. And every parent I know can relate to that.
Well, you're giving a great example of what being an empathetic leader is, and that's be real yourself.
You
Be transparent. Not that you have to unload everything and put yourself in a inappropriate position, but to create safety, which is what we want to talk about now. And I know Amanda and Linda mentioned this yesterday with children, and so let's talk about how basic response skills for any leader dealing with adults. That one of the basic skills is to make sure that you're providing in a place where they feel safe emotionally. And these are 5 bullet points listed again from Trauma in America. Lori, as you look at these 5, just talk through all 5 of them for us. We have time to do that today. So give us some insight on what these 5 are about.
So understanding the effects, how is this going to affect the person? As leaders, I feel like we need to be able to understand the effect that how the person that you're talking to, how it affects them. Are they going to feel safe talking to you about this? So for example, one of the things is, if it's a woman and a male pastor say it's a male pastor, but they're talking to a female parishioner, is that female going to feel safe, talking to this male pastor, and may not, because their trauma may have involved a male. So then that would make them feel unsafe. So just understanding the effect that you're having as a leader on that person that you're trying to help, making sure that and learn to listen without judgment. And a lot of times we don't openly or verbally judge a person, but it could be in our body language, the way we sit, the way we speak, our eye contact, are we rolling our eyes, when they say something about their trauma, so just paying attention to those things can help a person learn to feel the emotion. You feel the emotion of that other person, of that person you're talking to. Helps a lot, because if we can be, and that goes back to the empathy or the sympathy, empathy of learning that part of it. So, and then working with them where they're at. They may not be ready to fully disclose what happened to them. So even a disclosure of a little bit, may be enough. So just working with them right there. Asking open-ended questions. Anytime we're speaking with, ministry leaders, anybody that we're speaking to someone, learning what an open-ended question is as opposed to a closed-ended question. Sometimes even the words like, well, what was that like, is not even open-ended enough. What was that like for you? So just kind of, really trying to figure out how to get them. The purpose of open-ended questions, of course, is to get them to talk, to get them to open up. We all like to give advice, but sometimes advice is what's not needed. Sometimes the person just needs to have someone to listen. They're not looking for you to fix it. And I'm a huge fixer, so that's hard for me because I want to fix everybody. So I have to remind myself, I'm not there to fix it for them. I'm just there to listen and offer them love and empathy. And, that's my job.
Lori, you're not alone. I imagine everybody listening in this conversation are what I will call recovering fixers, because a lot of us got into what it is we do because we want to help people. And some of our personalities are fixers anyway, but
Right.
when we get educated and we feel like we have all the answers, so surely let's just get to the chase. Let's get this
Right.
done.
Right.
And we have to really learn exactly what was just said on that last slide. And it's not easy work, but doing this work is necessary to help provide safety for them. The other suggestion, get back to our slides here, on the next basic response skill, besides creating safety, is providing stabilization. And there's 3 really helpful points here, Bill, if you could help us talk through these. And I know I particularly want you to talk about that first one for sure, but let's talk through these 3 about providing stabilization.
I was talking to one of our therapists this morning, and she was describing how she sends out information to clients from day one. She said, because if I were in their situation, I'd want to know securely, how are things going to evolve? What do I need to do? It's a wonderful modification of the golden rule, that you should treat others as you would like to be treated if you were them, or if you were in their situation. And that takes the empathy to know when they have a different situation than you have. They feel more vulnerable perhaps than you feel, or they've experienced something you haven't experienced, at least not to that intensity. There was a wonderful response in one of Carl Rogers' interviews, where a woman asks him, I'd like you to tell me what to do. And he says, I'd like to be able to tell you what to do, but I don't know you as well as you know you. So perhaps we could help figure that out together. Under the stabilization, I think maybe the first one you might be asking about a little bit.
Yes.
Is the lament. Something that Protestant Christians tend to jump to praise and thanksgiving. We tend to overlook lament. This week started out, Sunday was Tish B'Av, which for Jews is to mourn the loss of both temples. It involves reading the book of Lamentations. It involves reading the book of Job. The Psalms, there's a huge amount in the Psalms. Save me, Lord, and vindicate me. It's a line out of Psalm 54. There's that I am distraught because of what my enemies are saying about me. How long, oh Lord? All those kinds of questions that are the natural reaction to a very, very unpleasant experience. And to be able to allow people to do that, to mourn about that, to express that, is not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced, the saying goes.
Yeah, as you say that, it's just mindful for me, having been in church all my life. This concept of lamenting, I believe most churches, most pastors, it's uncomfortable. You're not going to get up on Sunday morning and say, "Hey, let's all lament together." It's just not normal. So getting into this for ourselves and practicing it and then helping others learn actually to do all three of these things. Bring your pain to Christ and ask for healing. Learn what
Right.
forgiveness is, because not everybody's good at that either. Is that correct?
Well, and in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus says, I would really rather not do this. And the reaction of he on the cross, quoting Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from me? That precedes the healing. It's not for nothing that the kind of centerpiece of the faith, after the triumph and the joy of Palm Sunday, goes through the crucifixion. And for our Catholic and Orthodox brothers and sisters, Holy Saturday, when it's despair. I mean, God's dead before the unforeseen, amazing, kind of shocking event. I mean, what Mark says when the women discover Jesus is resurrected, he says they ran away and told no one because they were terrified. So that process of going through that is a it's central to Christianity, at least.
Definitely. I'm going to hit the pause button here and ask Linda to launch our final poll. And it has to do with what we just discussed, and that is providing our basic response skills. So the poll is, Linda, it's the one called safety. And if you'll launch that for us, and it's a poll asking you which of those 5 response skills that you already are practicing. Not to say how good you're practicing it, anything like that. But if you could say, yeah, I'm practicing understanding the effects. I'm listening without judgment, feeling emotions and working with them, asking open-ended questions, avoid giving advice. Uh, just to see where you are. And then this can all help us to see, okay, these are other ways. If I'm not doing them yet, these are ways that I can start improving my empathy with those around me. And for what Bill was, we'll leave this open just a couple more seconds. What Bill was just talking about with providing stabilization, I'm reminded that we can't really provide something that we haven't done ourselves or that we haven't experienced ourselves. And so all of us have the opportunity to do this for ourselves and with others, and then we can provide it to others. All right, we'll end that poll and see if you'll share the results there that we see we have room to grow in understanding the effects and avoiding giving advice. Not shocking, because that's what we said as we were talking about that. But listening without judgment, asking open-ended questions, and feeling emotions and works with them. That's things we're already doing. So this is really helpful. All right, we could close that. And let me go back to sharing our screen. And we're going to talk about re-traumatization now, and what in the world does that mean, and how can we avoid that, and then go into some helpful thoughts, how to practice this with those adults that you have in your ministry. This is coming from the resource guide from a Crisis Prevention Institute. So as we look at these 7 tips for preventing re-traumatization, I want to clarify this particular resource is more of a clinical resource. So look at the wordings here, from your ministry mindset and viewpoint as we look at these. Now, why are we bringing this up? I would say it's important for us as ministry leaders to understand whether consciously or unconsciously we can actually send someone to through a phase of re-traumatization. And of course, that's not what our intent is. So as you look at these 4 tips here to prevent that, Lori, what stands out to you as important in these first 4 tips? We'll see the first three, the final three on the next slide, but these first four, what's important here to understand?
Well, I think one is learn as much as you can. We want to know the whole story. And sometimes doing that can re-traumatize the person that we're trying to help, because when we are asking, we're asking very intensive questions and trying to get the story. But in doing that, if that is too long, it can cause the person to re-traumatize, because they're reliving this story all over again, and reliving the story can cause them to be re-traumatized. So we want to keep our conversations short, getting information that we need, but keeping it short so that they're not re-traumatized from that. And looking for the cause of behaviors is another one that stands out to me. And I think about a rape victim, for example, say a female who might have been raped. And one of the things I think our police sometimes will do is, well, what were you wearing? I mean, that's a question, but, maybe, the victim, the person who was traumatized by this, may go straight to, oh, well, if I tell them I was wearing a mini skirt, then they might think that I caused it. You know what I'm saying? So those kinds of things, looking for the cause of the behaviors, is very important to make sure we're very careful with that. When we're asking questions, is make sure we're very careful with that, because we don't want the person who was traumatized to be re-traumatized by the fact that we think it was their fault.
Exactly. Before we look at the next three, Bill, I'm looking at that second tip there, grow your skill of attunement. I'm wondering if we all have the same definition of attunement. In my mind, attunement means I'm staying present, and I'm back to those thoughts about providing safety. I'm feeling the emotions with them. How accurate is that in your alignment of the definition of attunement? How do we grow that skill?
Yeah, I think so. I was reminded of what Linda and Melissa and I think Amanda said too, about a good rule of thumb is to do the opposite of what the trauma did. That in trauma, people feel helpless, so allowing them to be empowered. They may feel, well, traumas are shocking. They're blindsiding. They feel unpredictable. So to be predictable, to be reliable, to observe when people seem to be becoming anxious, or when they clam up, they don't want to talk about it, and you go with that. I remember the old medical maxim, first, do no harm. Like Lori was saying, some really good interventions. Critical incident stress management was a great intervention, but in the hands of people who are untrained, they pushed too fast or they went too far, and it became re-traumatizing.
Yep.
So being gentle is a good, people were brutalized in a trauma, be gentle with them.
Yes. These next three, the 5, 6, and 7 tips, we may have already touched on these a little bit. I'm curious what you think about the 7th tip, debrief. Now, again, this is coming from a clinical resource. What are your thoughts about that from a ministry, angle, Lori?
Debriefing is going to be important because you're asking that person to talk about something very, very sensitive to them. One of the techniques I use when I'm talking with a trauma client is, we'll go through some timeline with them, but I always leave room in that hour that I'm seeing them to do like maybe a guided meditation or a deep breathing, some kind of mindfulness to, again, debrief or to calm them down before they leave. Because when you're talking about, you've got all kinds of emotions racing in their head, and they've been talking about this very traumatic event, and they're getting ready to walk out of your office, whether it's a minister's office or whether it's my office, you know. So just giving them a chance to be centered, to come back to some peaceful atmosphere before they leave. Again, mindfulness is a great tool for that, whether it's a guided meditation, whether it's a tapping technique, or whether it's a deep breathing technique, whatever you're able to use, but just to get them, or even if it's just listening to worship music at that point in time. So whatever that mindfulness looks like in your particular setting is going to be important to that person that you're talking to.
Yeah. And the ministry leaders, by the way, if you don't know what tapping is or all those things Lori just said, they just refer somebody to Lori, and she can help lead people through that. Before we leave this slide, Bill, I'm looking at number 5. It says provide choice-making opportunities. I know Amanda mentioned that kind of thing yesterday with kids. How does that work with adults, providing choice-making opportunities?
When people get to tell their story in a safe environment, they tend to start to treat themselves like they would ordinarily treat someone else. They show themselves the same kind of patience, pity, their feelings of shame will subside. They correct some of their unhelpful beliefs. They uh, become somewhat desensitized. Um, you can ask if they have concrete changes they would want to make. That's empowering. Listening to them is empowering. Being able to go over it in a safe enough environment can help the memories become more organized, less kind of blindsiding and shocking. We do have, we meaning religious organizations, have lots of stories that do make sense of trauma historically, although we don't want to necessarily jump to the our nation was destroyed because of our apostasy. You don't need to go to that first thing. And that's why I prefer the Psalms is a little better, where people go through their own, this is how I feel, and now what am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
There is what it's called. It's a song by it's called "Satisfied in You." You can Google it. And it just absolutely nails the 42nd Psalm. Why are you downcast, my soul? Why are you so unhappy within me? Yet I will hope in the Lord. But the way he sings it is just perfect.
I love the fact that you and Lori both have mentioned music. Certainly, there's plenty of ways to help those, which is why we have music in church. But how can we help people utilize that on their own? That's a great suggestion. Speaking of suggestions, we're circling around different things. We want to have a couple of slides here to remind you or share some thoughts moving forward of helping with adults. In this slide, everyone on the screen today, you've been in the last 2 days, so you've seen this. We're not going to touch on this again today. Just a reminder here that these are some questions. They are open-ended. I like Lori's suggestion of making them what happened to you, making it just more personal. How did that make you feel in that moment? Whatever additional ways you can make it that make it feel as personal as possible and open-ended, and getting them talking. We have this slide here that I want to add a bullet point to it, actually. It actually was on yesterday's bullet slide about lessons learned from children. This again is coming from Hope Rising, a long list of things that they mentioned about lessons learned from wounded women. And the bullet point not on here that was on the other slide yesterday said permission and space for spiritual exploration. Give them permission and space for spiritual exploration. And that goes along, Bill, I think, with what you were just talking about giving choices And that might sound a little scary to us as ministry leaders, like allow people to explore things spiritually, for spiritual exploration. So just speak to that, and then we'll look at the rest of this list. Bill, what does that mean to allow adults the space to explore spiritually?
I'm a little, why would that be uncomfortable or scary for a leader, for a spirit, for a religious leader?
Well, here's one thought, and I just know it'll be interesting to see if anybody else has this kind of experience. In some settings, you're told, it's back to that advice thing. You're told how you're going to respond to this spiritually. You know, that is some people's experience, right? And
Yeah.
it's really somewhat re-traumatizing. So the just having that mindset that I'm going to allow this person to explore what this means to them spiritually can be very life-giving. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that the journey has to be personalized. You have to make that journey yourself, or the person has to make that journey themselves. You can't tell them, oh, the Holy Land is this way. You know, go there. They do have to do the walking through the desert. They do have to come to that realization themselves, not just be told about it. And to get there, you do go through, you know, anger at God. You can have pictures of God that says, well, God is destructive and hateful, and that's the name of that tune. You have to allow people to play with that sort of thing. My experience has been that, for example, when people go down into despair, you know, like there is no God, there is no purpose, that's it, life just stinks. Um, it's tough to walk with them to that, but if you leave them alone, they don't stay there. They tend to be dissatisfied with that position. You do rely on the Holy Spirit. There is a certain amount of hope that just doesn't go away
Yeah.
and is kind of surprising.
That's great. I didn't want to miss that because I think that's helpful to all of us as ministry leaders. We didn't touch on it yesterday, so I wanted to bring that up. Lori, as you look at the rest of this list, and I know it's a long list and we could talk 30 minutes about it, but what stands out to you as far as lessons learned from wounded women?
Well, you know, it's hard for a wounded woman or wounded anybody to be nice to themselves, because when things happen to us, when bad things happen to us, we often wonder, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? You know, was I the cause of this? So, you know, just learning to be nice to yourself. Is a huge lesson. You know, shutting out the bad stuff, sometimes that can be very helpful, to be able to shut out the bad stuff for us. You know, and walking through each of these, you're right, we could talk probably hours on them. You know, a lot what I see is the negative self-talk. Most people are, but especially women who have experienced trauma, whether it's in adulthood through maybe an abusive situation, or if it was in childhood, they don't have a very good outlook of themselves. So just rejecting that helps a lot. You know, positive affirmations, one of the techniques I use with a lot of my trauma clients is I'll have them get a pack of Post-it notes and write a positive affirmation about themselves every day and post it up on their mirror, their wherever they would see it. And I have them do that all week. And at the end of the week, they take those down, put it in a safekeeping place, and then start again the next week. So that when they get to a point to where, you know, they're tired of writing, or, you know, they just don't write anymore, then they've got some positive affirmations to go back to because they've kept these. So Again, just, thinking positive things about yourself and speaking that. Get close to other people, get close to people with high hopes, people who we kind of say, oh, well, they're up here, so trying to get close to them. The people that we associate with, there's that old saying, watch who you associate with or associate yourself. If you want to be a leader, associate yourself with leaders. That's very true. Gratitude is a big one for me. What can you be thankful for today? Not tomorrow, not yesterday, not a week from today, but today. What are you grateful for right now? What are you grateful for today? Look into the sky. We always look to God, or at least we should. We don't always look to God.
That's right.
Just look into the sky or look into God. That prayer is huge. And again, I go back to music because I know for myself, if I'm feeling a little depressed or anxious, then I put on some worship music, and that the mindfulness part of it, that just, gets me into a good, learning to read goal is a huge one for me, because most people who have been traumatized don't know how to read goal. So just learning how to reset goals for yourself is a big one for me. And then, practice movement daily, get out there, exercise, whether you feel like it or not. If you don't do anything but walk outside your front door, walk to the street, turn around and walk back, do some of that at least every day.
Mm-hmm. Bill, I want to ask you to comment on one thing, and then we're going to go to our Q&A so we can start wrapping up here. But toward the bottom, I want to look at these from the lens of a couple. So if we have a couple that we're trying to minister to, the 2 bullet points that say give healthy affection often and make a difference in another's life, it seemed like those could be really helpful to couples who are struggling. Can you speak into that for a moment?
Trauma can be devastating for couples. The loss of a child, loss of a job, things going through a hurricane, because people grieve at different rates, they grieve in different ways. At least my observation has been that women are more comfortable with guilt and self-blame, that men are more comfortable with anger. Men don't like evaluating their goals. They are, by God, going to make that original goal work come hell or high water. So you have these very different ways of coping. And it's certainly one of the things in marriages for couples is that you need a certain number of positive interactions. You need to say, I appreciate you. You need to say, I love you. You need to say, I understand. You need to do things that you enjoy together. You need to shift the focus from I am getting through this to we are getting through this, and not to be in the position of saying, look, I don't need, I'm going through enough now. I don't need your stuff along with it, because you're both going through something. And insofar as you can do it together, at the very least, it'll expand your repertoire of options. It'll give you empathy. It'll help you see how to cope from different perspectives. And what is it? It says, Luke says, 2 are better than 1, because if one falls down, the other can help them up. I mean, 2 is better as long as you can be supportive, mutually supportive, and understanding of one another.
That's good. I appreciate you, giving some thoughts into the. Go ahead. Got something
The
else?
the first poll. I mean, a best friend was the number one person you could talk to, and your spouse is probably a little more emotionally involved than your best friend. If you're talking about things like quitting your job or
Right.
stuff like that, your spouse may be more reactive than you need. But but your spouse is still somebody who's been through a lot with you.
Definitely. So we have one question here that we want to address in the Q&A. If you have yet to put one in and you want us to talk about it, please go ahead and do that. This is Nancy. I appreciate your being so engaged with this. The question is, how can we help break the cycle of children who are traumatized but don't receive treatment until they are adults and having problems? Lori, what are your thoughts on that? How can we break this cycle of children who are traumatized?
Well, just being, if you work with children, is not one of my fortes to work with on a professional basis. But if you work with children, just talk to them about trauma and talk to them, especially if you're in an area where you walk, but where you work with children who may be, threatened by that environment, say inner city kids or whatever, just talk to them about trauma and about what that looks like. Sometimes kids don't know what trauma is. It's normal for them, even though they're being traumatized. So just talk to them about what trauma is and about what it looks like, so that they're aware that, there's possible trauma in their life.
I'm wondering if there's some thoughts about how to help their parents. Bill, is there any ways to answer that question as far as ending the cycle of children not dealing with their things to their adults, that we ministry leaders, as we work with those children's parents?
Parenting workshops and educating parents can be extremely helpful. Parents learn no parent usually wants to hurt their child. They just don't know what else to do than what they're doing. So education can help tremendously. Never underestimate the power of one healthy person. I think through the power of the Holy Spirit, children recognize health when they see it. And I mean, you may have nobody in your life, but that one can be enough. And there was a study done some years ago of really stellar parents. And some huge number of them, like 40, 50%, had had horrible parenting. They'd been abused, they'd been neglected, they'd been mistreated. And they either knew somebody, had that one person, or they said, that didn't help me, I'm not going to do it. And they didn't. So don't get hopeless.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and that's just going to make me plug that book again, Hope Rising. And if you have yet to buy the book or look it out, I encourage everybody to check that book out, because really that is what we're trying to push here, and that is how to get hope to those who are hurting and start them down the road of healing. So I know we're a little past 1, so we want to honor your time. And it's a lunch and learn, so your lunch is probably over. Or if you haven't had lunch yet, it's time to go get lunch. So I want to thank all of our panelists, and particularly Lori and Bill, for sitting in today and helping us think through the lens of serving adults. So thank you guys for doing that. Linda being on the outside today and monitoring our chat. Ministry leaders, we just thank you for what you're doing. For those that you are serving, wherever you are, whatever that ministry is, you are helping accomplish exactly what we've been talking about. And as we are trying as Samaritan to bring those two silos of the faith communities and the mental health services together, you're accomplishing that just by being more informed. So thank you for doing that. And our prayers are with you as you do that the rest of this day through this weekend and as you move forward. So those of you who are watching this on a recording, if you have yet to connect with us at Samaritan, give us a call, 926-2959, or go to our website, which is SamaritanGulfCoast.com. Thanks again for tuning in. We hope the rest of your day is awesome. Have a great afternoon. We'll see you later.